And today we're going to finish this series. Last week I started it. It's a short series. This week I'm finishing it. It's called Right on the Money. And last weekend I told you, and I'll tell you if you weren't here last week, I'll just tell you the same thing. If you brought a friend with you today, you can just look at your friend right now and just say, I'm so sorry. My bad. I had no idea it was the money talk. I just kind of share that with you because last weekend I said that this was going to be the money talk this weekend, next weekend. So I kind of declared. Last week you didn't have a clue what was coming. This week I kind of declared. So I expected this to be like one of our lowest attended weekends, of all weekend. Because some of you are here, you scratch your head and say, Pastor Brian, why would you talk about money in the church? I mean, don't you know that when the church talks about money, people get funny? Why would you do this? And the reason why I talk about money in the church is because God talked about money. And if I'm going to fully teach you the gospel of Jesus Christ, you have to understand what it means to be a totally, fully devoted follower of Jesus Christ. And it's impossible to be a fully devoted follower of Jesus without trusting Him when it comes to your money. Money management is a discipleship issue. Money management is a spiritual issue. Now, last week we had some fun and we kind of talked about some interesting ways that people use money. I told the story last week of Kanye West. He recently spent $60,000 replacing his bottom row of teeth with diamonds. He said, that's what rock stars do. He said, you know what? I just thought diamonds are better than gold. Okay, so that's one way. I read this one. I really like this one. Lady Gaga, she recently spent $50,000 investing in a ghost detector and a ghost eater for her house. Because she was so terrified of ghosts. That's one way of spending $50,000. Katy Perry, when she was dating Russell Brand, she wanted to give him an out-of-this-world 35th birthday present. She bought him a trip to outer space in the Virgin Galactic. $200,000. Here's the $200,000 buys you. A trip to the Earth's atmosphere, out of the Earth's atmosphere, a 5-minute float, and then a trip back to the Earth. Now, kind of interesting, and last week I had some conversations with people on the patio, and some people said, man, I can't believe that, Kanye would spend that kind of money. Can you imagine the orphanages that we could build? And could you imagine, how many kids we could feed? And this kind of a thing. And I kind of had an interesting response back, because here's where I'm at when it comes to money. I believe money is neutral. Money can be used for good things. Money can be used for bad things. But as followers of Jesus Christ, here's what God asked us. He asked us to give 10%. And He says, if you'll give 10% back to me, you have a lot of freedom in how you use the other 90%. And so if you want to use the other 90%, okay, to like get diamonds in your teeth, or you want to use it, like travel to space, I believe there's some freedom as followers of Jesus to be able to do that. Because God says, listen, money is a tool to be used. Right now I'm reading the book of Mark. And in the book of Mark, I'm reading about Peter. And Peter was a disciple of Jesus. And many of us know, some of you may be aware that Peter was a fisherman. But don't get the picture that he was a guy with like a rod and a reel. He was a successful businessman. Fish was the food that they ate in that day and time. They didn't eat chicken, okay? They didn't eat beef. It was fish. And he had a business that had grown, and he had people that worked for him, and it was a huge export business. And if you'll do some research, and if you ever want to do something interesting, Google Peter's house. Because they still have the remains of Peter's house. You can be able to see it. It is a gigantic house. It's massive, huge mansion. And you know what Peter did with this house? Some people would say, well, what could we do, with this mansion? But here's the deal. Peter used it for hospitality. And every time that Jesus was in Capernaum, guess where Jesus and the disciples would meet? Peter's house. That's where they were. And so I don't think that it's a bad thing, all right, to be able to do things with money. We have a lot of freedom to be able to do things with money, but we want to make sure that we operate in God's principles. Now, Jesus tells this story that we're going to look at today in Matthew chapter 24 about a very wealthy businessman. And this wealthy businessman, he goes away on his trip. But before he leaves for this trip, He tells his 3 servants, he says, I'm going to put you in charge of all of my possessions. So he divided up his wealth to the 3 servants, and he says, I want you to make the most of this. And when I get back, we'll see how well you do. So he goes away on his trip. He comes back, and he says, okay, give me an account. Give me a report. How'd you guys do? And 2 of these guys, they had a great report. 1 of these guys had a bad report. And in this story, we're going to learn 8 laws of financial health. So if you have your programs, you can open them up if you want to take some notes right now. Last week, I gave you 4, and I'll give you the review on those. And then this week, we're going to finish this story that Jesus told, and you'll get to hear the other 4. So here's the first law of financial health. Everything I have belongs to God. Everything I have belongs to God. Look at Matthew 25 and verse 14. It says, again, the kingdom of heaven can be illustrated by the story of a man going on a long trip. He called together his servants and entrusted his money to them while he was gone. Whose money was it? Was it the master's money or was it the servant's money? It was the master's money. And the same thing is true of us as well. Everything that we have, it comes from God. We are not owners. We are simply managers. What you think you own is simply on loan from God. Everything we have belongs to God. Here's the second law of financial health. Money is a tool to be used. It's a tool to be used. One of the men in the story, he took the money that he had been entrusted with and he invested it. He used it as a tool. Actually, 2 of the guys did. They invested it as a tool. Money's a tool to be used. Here's the third principle. You get to choose what you want to do with God's money that he's entrusted with you. It's your choice. You make those decisions. And here's the fourth law of financial health. You will give an account of what you do with God's money. One of these days, you're going to stand before God, and God's going to say, what did you do with what I gave you? You're going to have an audit of your life. You're not going to be audited by the IRS. You're going to be audited by the GOD. And here's the difference between the IRS and the GOD. You don't have to bring the reports. You don't have to bring the papers. God sees everything that you do here on this earth, and one day you are going to stand before God, and he's going to say, okay, now it's time to give an account of what you have done. Now that's just a review of last week's message. Let's pick up this week. Pick up the story in verse 19. It says, after a long time, their master returned from his trip, and he called them to give an account of how they had used his money. The servant to whom he had entrusted the 5 bags of silver came forward with 5 more, and he said, Master, you gave me 5 bags of silver to invest, and I have earned 5 more. This guy has a good ROI, right? He has a good return on investment. I mean, he got 100% return. I would be happy with 10%, wouldn't you? He got back 100%. I mean, this guy bought Google. He got in on the front end of Amazon, and his stock, it soared. Then verse 22 says, the servant who had received the 2 bags came forward and said, Master, you gave me 2 bags of silver to invest, and I've earned 2 more. He did very well as well. But the third guy doesn't have a very good story to tell. Verse 24. Then the servant with the 1 bag, he came and said, now listen to this response. Master, I knew you were a harsh man, harvesting crops you didn't plant and gathering crops you didn't cultivate. I was afraid. I was afraid I would lose your money, so I hid it in the earth. Look, here's your money back. Now listen to his response. He said, I knew you were a hard man. Here's what he's doing. He's turning the tables. He's trying to put this on his boss, not on him. This guy, he takes the money, he buries it, and then he blames the master. He says, I'm a victim here. And people, they do this today. They make bad decisions. They mess up their lives. They don't know what to do, so they play the blame game. They blame the government. They blame their boss. They blame their parents. And many people, they go back and they blame God. Now, we do this all the time when we blame others because we don't want to take responsibility. A couple months ago, my son Braden, he was 4, and Friday's my day off. So I went in, I woke him up, and he said, "Dad," he said, "can I watch some cartoons?" I said, "Sure, that'd be fine." So he went in and he had his swords, because he watches his cartoons. He watches the fight scenes with swords, because he fights at the same time simultaneously. And so he's got his swords, and he's watching, and I'm on my chair, I'm just kind of watching him, and he sees me watching him, and he knows I kind of like him, all right? Like, fighting and sword thing, like, I kind of get a kick out of it. And so as I'm watching him, he takes his sword, and he throws it at the TV. And he breaks our TV. That's the response I had as well. But I didn't laugh afterwards. I was mad. I was angry. He broke our TV. So I look at him like, "Braden, what are you thinking? Why would you throw the sword at the TV?" And he gets his lip out. And he's really sad. And this is really uncharacteristic of him to throw the sword like that. I mean, he's a sensitive boy. My daughter, probably. Him? No way. And so we have this conversation, and I tell him, I said, "Listen, when your mom and your sister get home, you're going to have to apologize to them." He said, "Okay." So I text Shannon, and she's in school. She's a teacher, so I'm texting her. And I had to tell her to make sure that she tells Sadie, because, she's 7, and she will eat him alive. So I said, "Take care of that before, they get home." And so she said, "Okay, I got it." So then they get home. Braden hears the garage door open. He goes running down, which I think he's going to apologize, which is the right thing to do. And then Shannon comes in and says, "Do you know what he told us?" I said, "What?" She said, "He told us that you told him to throw his sword." He said, "What?" I said, "More family meeting right now in the living room. Everybody get in here." So he came in, and I look at him. I said, "Braden, did you tell them that I told you to throw the sword?" And he's just crying. He's bawling. He said, "Dad," he said, "when you woke me up, I said, 'Can I watch cartoons?' And you said, 'Yeah, go get the swords and go get those guys.'" He said, "I was getting those guys, Dad." I don't know how this happens, but in my house, it always comes back to me. But here's what happened. It was my fault. I did say that. And here's what we try to do. We make bad choices and bad decisions with God, and then we want to blame somebody else for our decisions and say, "It wasn't my fault. I didn't do it." That isn't the way it goes down. Understand that God didn't tell you to put all of your expenses on credit card. See, so many people, they'll charge things up, they'll get themselves in debt, and then they'll blame God. Say, "God, why aren't you getting me out? Why do I have so much stress? And God, so much stress in my marriage? And God, why won't you save my marriage?" God didn't tell you to go out and buy the car that you couldn't afford. God didn't tell you to go out and buy a house that you can't afford. God didn't tell you to go out to eat that much. We blame God for our health. We blame God for all these things. And Solomon said it so well in Proverbs 19 and verse 3. He said, "People ruin their lives by their own foolishness, and then they're angry at the Lord." You spell blame, be lame. And every time you blame your problems on somebody else, you are being lame. We have to take responsibility for our own choices and our own actions. Verse 27, the master looks back at the servant who buried the money and said, "Why didn't you deposit my money in the bank? At least I could have got some interest on it." Here's the 5th law of financial health. I must wisely use God's money. Not hide it, not bury it, not deny it. Money is a tool to be used, and it's meant to be used, not to be stockpiled. Money is a lot like manure. You spread it around, and it makes things grow. It's like fertilizer. But if you pile it up, it just starts stinking. God, He expects you to invest what He's given you. And when I'm talking about investment, I'm not talking about like investing in the stock market. See, God wants you to invest in something that's going to far outlast you. And the only thing that is going to outlast you is people. It's people. One of these days when you die, he's going to take everything that he loaned you and he's going to loan it to somebody else. What you have here on this earth is not going to last. The only thing that's going to last is people. And God has given us a mission. And our mission is to lead people to find and follow Jesus. And every time that you invest in the kingdom causes, you are investing into people's lives. You are investing into life change. Now, verse 26 says this. The master replied, "You wicked and lazy servant." That's strong, my friends. He uses the word wicked. Wicked is not a term that I would use for money mismanagement. When I think of wicked, I think of like rape or murder or child abuse or sex trafficking. But God says this. He says, Brian, it's wicked anytime you misuse or abuse the resources that I've given you. And Brian, if you don't use it correctly, it's wicked. I put you on this earth to test you in this area. And if I can't trust you with money, there's some serious money management issues. And doing nothing, that's inexcusable. That's true of our money, that's true of our time, and that's true of our talent as well. If you sit on it instead of use it, if you bury it, if you just forget about it, you say, I'm not going to use it. That's a problem. That's wrong, God says. You know, as I was reading through this story, there's three individuals. One had 5, one had 2, one had 1 talent. Which is the most likely to bury it? It's the one with 1 talent. Here's why. Because this person looks at the 5 talent people and they say, they don't need me. I'll just sit on the bench and I'll watch. I'm not a superstar, so I won't do anything. I don't have the brains. I don't have the looks. I don't have the experience. I didn't come from a great family. I didn't become a Christian until late in life. And there's 1,000 excuses. And I want you to listen closely. God is not going to judge you based upon somebody else. You're not going to get to heaven and God says, why weren't you more like your mom? Why weren't you more like your dad? Why weren't you more like your sister? See, God's going to look at you and he's going to say, how did you use what I gave you? You don't get to choose what you have. God has chosen that for you. But you do choose what you do with what God has given you. And some of you today, you've lost your joy. Some of you are just going through the motions. You're just punching hours. And you're missing the life that God has for you. You're playing it safe. You're burying your talents. Why would you do that? Why would somebody bury their talents? Here's the answer. Fear. And that leads us to the 6th law of financial health. I must move against my fears. I must move against my fears. I have to do what I fear the most. Some of you have a talent in business, but you're fearful. You're afraid. What if I fail? Some of you have a talent in music, but you're afraid. What if I mess up? There are always going to be what ifs in the back of your mind. The third servant answered the master. It said, verse 25, I was afraid. There's so many things that we become afraid of. One of them is we're afraid of self-doubt. We say, I can't do it. How many of you in school had a fear of raising your hands? Some of you still have it. Some of you have a fear of being self-conscious. What are other people going to think about me? You have what is called a fear of man. And I just want to tell you, if you care about what other people are going to say about you and think about you, you're never going to do anything. Because people are always going to be critical. That's just part of life. You've got to move past your fears of what other people think about you. I love this principle called the 18-40-65 principle. Here's the way it works. When you're 18 years old, all you think about is what other people think about you. You're so self-conscious, worried about how you look and what you say and how you perform and how you act, and everybody's looking at you and you're so fearful of that. And then whenever you turn 40, You get to a place where you say, I don't care what other people say. I don't care what other people think. I'm just going to do what I'm called to do. And then when you turn 65, you realize that no one was ever thinking about you in the first place. Because everybody was so absorbed in their own selves and what you were thinking about them. We got to move past our fear. Some of you have fear of self-pity. You say, I failed in the past, so I can't try it again. Listen to me, everybody fails. That's how you learn. Don't call it failure, call it an experiment. Call it an education. I'm quite educated. I've had a lot of failure in life. I love John Maxwell's book, and the title says it all. Failing forward. How do we fail forward? You know, Judas and Peter, they both denied Jesus. As we're leading up to Easter, here's Judas and here's Peter, and they both have an opportunity to succeed, but they both failed. And they both had a different reaction to their failure. Both of them denied their Savior, but Judas, he threw a pity party, and he hung himself. But Peter, he repented. And 40 days later, he started the church. And 3,000 people accepted Christ as their Savior and got baptized that day. Listen, God, He chose the biggest failure to build the church. He didn't use the superstar. Some of you are here today, and you have the heart to do it, but you're just afraid. It's like, I would love to be able to step up. I would love to be able to give. I would love to be able to be involved. I would love to use money. I'm just scared. Some of you are kind of like my daughter, Sadie. I got this offering envelope back from our financial officer. She was in services about 4 weeks ago, and on Saturday night, and so she took one of the offering envelopes. My daughter's 7, and here's what she did. She put up there on the top right there, she signed up for automated giving. She's going to give monthly on the 15th of each month. Step number 2, all right, debit credit card. Name on card, she put our address. Down there on the account number, she put Sadie Moore. And I love that here. She put her name in, put our address in, city. Tried to put her mom's email address in there. Messed that up a little bit. Put her mom's phone number. And then over here, watch this on her gift. Tithes and offerings. $1,000. Not bad for my daughter, 7. Imagine Building Fund. She's going to be a part of helping us build our new building here in Crosspoint. So she gave $2.07. And then Manna. Manna is our program where we feed kids in Guatemala and we feed kids in Philippines. Last year, you guys served 60,000 meals to hungry children around the world. Well, Sadie decided to give 3 cents towards that. So she came down $3,100 total, okay, is how much she's giving to church. And I love Carl Fry's response back, okay, on the very top. He said, Sadie forgot to give us her card number. Some of you are kind of like Sadie. You have the heart to do it. You just have to move past your fears. And here's the 7th law of financial health. If I don't use it, I lose it. If I don't use it, I lose it. Some of you today are in debt. You're not going to get out of debt overnight. One of God's principles of getting out of debt, it's the little by little principle. Same principle is true in weight loss. You know, this last year I lost 30 pounds. I didn't do it fast. I didn't get overweight overnight, and I'm not going to get out of it overnight. Guess what? It takes some work. Corey, I'm killing today. I worked out with Corey earlier. What was that, Friday? I'm dying, okay? It takes some work. It's hard to be able to do that, but guess what? Little by little, you begin to see results. The same is true of getting out of debt. You're not going to get out of debt overnight. And here at Crosspoint, we want to help you. We're starting a brand new class next Saturday night called Financial Peace University. It's at 6:30. It will teach you budgeting. It will teach you how to communicate with your spouse and how to get out of debt, because we want to give you tools to move from stress to move to a place of peace in your life. And here's the second principle, just to share with you as your pastor. After Easter, we usually grow 75 to 100 people here at Crosspoint. And 10:30 is one of the prime services for people to come to. And we don't have 100 more seats that are in here. They're ready for people along the way once they get here. And so I'm trying to move some of you out of 10:30. Maybe you'll consider going to Saturday night and then attending the Financial Peace class. We have service at 5. Come to Financial Peace. right after that service is over. If you're interested in that, sign up on your connection card today. Here's the seventh principle. If I don't use it, I lose it. Verse 28. Then he ordered, take the money from this servant and give it to the one with the 10 bags. Now that's not fair. Fair ended in the Garden of Eden. To those who use well what they are given, even more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who do nothing, even what little they have will be taken away. Listen, God has a right to take away anything that we don't use for his purposes. If I refuse to exercise, I'll lose muscle. If I refuse to think, I'll lose my mind. If I refuse to practice sports, or, for those of you that are musical, guess what? You will lose that ability. But the flip side is also true. If I use it wisely, guess what happens? You get more of it. God will give you more. Whatever you need more of, give it to God. If you need more time, give God some of your time in your morning, and he'll allow you to be able to maximize your time throughout the day. If you need more energy, give God some of your energy, and guess what God will do? He will maximize your energy throughout the day. If you need more intellect, give God some of your brain, and guess what he'll do? He will maximize your intelligence. If you need more money, give God some of your money, and he will maximize the 90% that you have. Galatians chapter 6-7 is a principle. He says, you will always harvest what you plant. You reap what you sow. And when you sow a seed, you don't get one seed back. You get back exponentially. You get back more than you sow. Here's the eighth law and the final law of financial health. God will reward me for good money management. God will reward me for good money management. Verse 21 says, the master was full of praise. He looked at the one with 5, and he looked at the one with 2, and he said, well done, my good and faithful servant. You've been faithful in handling the small amount, so now I'm going to give you many more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together. 3 rewards that you're going to get if you manage God's money correctly. 1, when you get to heaven and you stand before God on that audit, he's going to look at you and he's going to say, well done. Attaboy. Attagirl. I'm proud of you. Well done. Second thing, he's going to put you in charge of more. You will have more responsibility in heaven based upon what you do here on this earth. He says, this is a test. And the third thing, he says, let's celebrate. Here's the 3 rewards: affirmation, promotion, and celebration. Did you know that your role in heaven is going to be determined by how well you managed here on earth? This is a test. Luke chapter 16 says this, and if you are untrustworthy about worldly wealth, who will trust you with the true riches of heaven? And if you're not faithful with other people's things, why should you be trusted with things of your own? Now catch this verse. No one can serve 2 masters, for you will hate one and love the other. You will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. It doesn't say you shouldn't. It says you can't. I want you to listen to this story of a man here at our church named Todd that moved from going the world's way to God's way in his money management. Watch this.
My name is Tyler Lewis, and I've been attending Crosspoint since 2011, and I serve in the parking lot and the board of trustees. And this is my story about tithing. Well, I was raised Christian, and then in my 20s, I rebelled. And for me, that meant turning my back on God in a lot of ways. Got divorced, started leading a very selfish lifestyle, and financially too, started becoming really selfish. So it's basically hoarding it all for myself. And the end result of that kind of decision is basically destruction. And so by my late 20s, I was down to literally a crappy 1-bedroom apartment behind an El Pollo Loco, and with a mattress on the floor with my clothes and my trash bags. And so I needed to change some habits, and so I crawled back into church during that time, and little by little, God started rebuilding me. And one of the things, not only within myself, but with how I handle money. And so, basically, I mean, when I was down that low, I had a $500 car, and my credit score was also in the 500s, so, which is great if that's batting average, but for FICO score, it's not so good. Anyway, I started going back to church, and they taught about tithing there. And at first, I was really, hesitant to try it because I was barely making it. I wasn't even making it on 100% of the money, much less if I gave away 10% and had to figure out how to do it on 90%. So honestly, I didn't have the faith to start at 10%. I had the faith though to start with $20 one week, and then maybe $40 the next week, up to like 1%. And then little by little over time, 1%, 2%, 3%. And finally when I was, around 10%, it got easier. And all of a sudden, I can't explain it. I don't understand why this happens or why it happened. When I started taking God at His word, that He would take care of me if I was just obedient in this area of tithing, then everything changed. And all of a sudden, living on 90% went way farther than me trying to make it on 100% every day. And so it wasn't that if I gave $100, that $100 would come in the mail the next day, but it's just somehow supernaturally it stretched. And so bills that I would expect to be at a certain level, they'd come in and they would be way less. Or just opportunities and doors would open that I wasn't expecting, and then all of a sudden God would pour His blessing. And so, my story continues that I started a business that year. This is 2003, that I was at my rock bottom. And so by late 2003, 2004, I was starting a business, and God blessed that business. And thank God that I was doing my part in the tithing, because He then opens up channels of further blessing. And so when I started, I had zero, nothing, and God has blessed that business to be a multi-seven-figure business a year now, which I only say not to impress anyone, but to just impress upon people that if you take God at His word, that He's not messing around, that He delivers.
Malachi chapter 3 and verse 10 says this. It says, bring all the tithes into the storehouse. The tithe is 10%. The storehouse is the local church. So there will be enough food in my temple. When it's talking about food, it's talking about spiritual food. The people will be found. The people will find Jesus. It says, if you do, says the Lord of heaven's armies, I will open the windows of heaven for you. I will pour out a blessing. How many of you want to be blessed by God? Like all of us do. And don't just limit God's blessing to just finances. God can bless you relationally in your marriage. God can bless you if you're single with somebody else. God, He can bless you in your physical health. God can bless your children in the choices and the decisions that they make. God, He can bless you financially as well, but He can bless you in so many arenas. And He says He'll bless you so great that you won't have enough room to take it in. And this is the only place in Scripture that says this. Try it. Put me to the test. Now, I realize some of you may be here, and some of you may be a little cynical. I have a little cynical part of me as well. And some of you may be here today and say, well, Pastor Brian, I see what's going on. This is just about the church getting my money. And if that's what your feeling is, and if you feel like there's like a hidden agenda here that we want your money, then I want to tell you, I believe in this tithe principle so much that I would encourage you, those of you that are cynical, find another church to tithe to. Keep coming here. We're going to feed you spiritually. We're going to feed your kids spiritually. But find another church. You drove by several of them on the way here. Just pick one. I believe in this principle so much that I want to challenge you to take the 3-10 challenge based upon Malachi permission, I'll share them with the group. And so we're going to go on a 90-day spiritual growth journey together. And if you're willing to take that challenge, just check the box, put your information on the front. The next one says, I'll increase my giving by 1%. Now this has twofold. Some of you are like Todd saying, you know what, I can't go from 3 to 10, but maybe you'll go 1%. That's a good place to start. Bad place to stay, but good place to start. And if you'll take that challenge, check that box. Or else, some of you may be like me and some of our team members that are here at Crosspoint, where we said we're going to give God our tithes and our offerings. Now he asked for the 10% to go back to the storehouse, to go back to his church. Anything on top of that can go to wherever you want that to be able to go. It may be Manning, maybe camps, it may be, a cancer, maybe whatever it may be along the way. But one of the things that I want to challenge you to do is to continue to give an extra percent. Some of you may be like Shannon and I, and we started 7 years ago where we increased our giving 1% every year. Why? Because in my heart, I know the only antidote to greed is generosity. And if I live my life like this, and I have a clenched fist, God can't put anything in me. But when I live my life like this, I become a river of blessing. You become a river of blessing. So if you want to take that challenge, if you would just simply write that on your connection card, drop this off in the offering bucket. Church, I love you. I'm praying for you. Next weekend, I have a guest speaker coming in named Reggie Campbell. He's a businessman. He's not a pastor, but he's a Christian businessman. He has written several books. One of his books is called Mentoring Like Jesus, and it rocked my world. I read it about 5 years ago, and I implemented radical mentoring in our church, all from what I learned from Reggie. Reggie has a brand new book out called Radical Husbands. And so Reggie's going to be with us next week. It's all about mentoring next week. How do you mentor your children? How do you mentor your grandchildren? How do you find a mentor? How do you find your Paul? And then how do you mentor your Timothy along the way as well? So if you're interested in that, hope you'll be back with us next week as we worship again here at Crosspoint Church. God bless you, church. Let's worship now through our singing as well as through our giving.